When you share your food, you share your heart. So what's on your table this holiday season? Save on your festive feast at Kroger with delicious deals on all the holiday classics. Or wow the crowd with something new, like a quinoa stuffed butternut squash. It's sure to add a pop of color to your spread. How about a sweet potato casserole with a crunchy oat streusel topping, made with care for the sweet tooth and the savory tooth? With Kroger, fill your table with love and watch as your guests' hearts get as full as their bellies. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a one-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast. Last week's episode was on Megan Rapinoe, the most loved and hated women's footballer in the world. If you haven't already, be sure to check it out.
Welcome to Heroes and Humans for today's episode on Eric Cantona. Cantona, how could we not have done an episode on him yet? Cantona, the footballer who thought he was an artist, transformed English football after joining Manchester United for just £1 million, not even very much, even in 1992. He took a terrible English game that had barely begun growing out of kick and rush, and he turned it into a sophisticated game by playing between the lines, a space that nobody in England before him seems to have discovered. He helped turn the Premier League into the world's biggest league, and he became the most popular and the most hated footballer of his time. Best of all, of course, was his karate kick of the Crystal Palace fan and far-right supporter Matthew Simmons. In a way, this episode is a commemoration because we're broadcasting this just a little bit ahead of the 30th anniversary of that karate kick that lives in memory long after even Cantona's most refined chipped goals have been forgotten. Cantona set England alight for about 5 years in the 90s and then suddenly retired to become another kind of artist, an actor, and then another kind, and then another kind. Last we heard, he was on a singing tour of the Netherlands.
Must be a paid-up groupie by this point if he's singing in the
No, a
Netherlands.
friend of mine told me he'd been to see Cantona perform. I said, did he sing well? And my friend said no.
Good.
Alex Ferguson, the only manager who ever got the best out of Cantona, said later that he was the perfect player in the perfect club at the perfect moment because he did also transform Manchester United. How could a man who had so little impact anywhere else, who never won an international trophy, be so transformative in 1990s England? We're going to talk about this. I'll use my memories of the time. Your memories of the time are not useful because you were not sentient even then.
Hazy.
But I, in the 90s, was covering football intensively. And I've also used very good biographies of Cantona by Ian Ridley and Philippe Auclair, Ferguson's memoir, and books about the time and about football by Matt Dickinson, Michael Cox, Tom Williams, and many, many more because nobody can resist Cantona. Mehreen, why don't you give us the stats?
Eric Cantona is born in Marseille in 1966. He played for 6 French clubs before the age of 25, although I only have a very hazy memory of him in that Leeds shirt where Leeds won the Premier League in 1992.
We'll come to that.
And then from 1993 through 1997 is peak Eric Cantona. He wins 4 English titles and 2 FA Cups in those 5 years at Manchester United before suddenly disappearing off the face of the footballing world. And now that I've come to think of it, I don't think I've ever seen a picture of Eric Cantona wearing the famous blue shirt.
The France shirt.
The France shirt.
He does play not very successfully for France, but is ousted, as we'll come to, as they're putting together the team that's going to win the World Cup 98.
So he only exists, at least in my memories, as a Manchester United player and then someone who has subsequently gone on to do very weird things, including lots more adverts and quite a lot of political advocacy, which is something we can also talk about. Simon, tell us about his early life in Marseille.
Yeah, so he's very much a Marseillais. And like many people from Marseille, his origins are elsewhere in the Mediterranean. One side of his family immigrated from Sardinia, and his mother's father, I think, was a Catalan who fought for the Republicans against Franco in Spain's civil war, was wounded and fled to France, where he then stayed, because once you're in France, why leave? That's always been my philosophy since I came to Paris. They inhabited originally a one-room cave in the hills, just on the fringes of Marseille, where Marseille meets Provence. And they gradually, over the years, they expand the cave, which is on this hillside. So the cave had reportedly been used by the Wehrmacht, the German army, as a lookout post in World War II. But the Cantonais sort of add to it. So it eventually becomes a full jerry-built house on the edge of the hill overlooking the city. So beautiful setting, Marseille is wonderful climate. It's just a very, very messed up city. And I think this is part of the Cantona story. It's an anarchic city. There are no rules. There's no laws. Mafias are often more important than the police. You can drive whichever side of the road you feel like that day. The taxi driver will charge you whatever he feels. The French state has never quite exercised its authority in Marseille. It's not entirely the developed world. And there's a strong sense of rebelliousness, against the rest of France, like who are these people who think they can tell us what to do?
Yeah.
And then especially against Paris. So I think we start to see the origins here of Cantona as a true Marseillais.
Tell us about, I guess, the sort of unique worlds that his parents inhabit when he's growing up.
It's a working class family, but it's working class bohemia, which is its own special subworld. So his parents have jobs. His mum's a dressmaker. His dad, Albert, is a psychiatric nurse and an amateur goalkeeper. But most of all, Albert is an amateur painter. Eric would spend his days out at school and playing football, and then he'd come home in the evening and sit in Albert's studio and watch Albert paint. He's a very serious painter. He was passionate about it, but it wasn't his job. So you're in the working class, but you live in this world where art is very important. It's the highest thing, and that's what Cantona grows up with.
Does young Eric, dabble in the arts?
Yeah, he seems to start painting quite early, and he deeply cares about it, and he's quite knowledgeable about art and painters. Above all, he starts to think the best thing you can be in the world is an artist. And what is an artist? It's someone who expresses himself with full spontaneous freedom. So an artist isn't bound by rules. An artist just is ruled by their own heart, and what your heart tells you to do, you express. And initially, I think he thinks that's what painters do, and that's what footballers do, because he feels that football he later says it's a minor art, but it's an art. And he tries all sorts of art forms, but what he doesn't really do is speech. He has a trauma at school where he has a teacher whose bigger son bullies him. Son is a kind of dropout biker figure and bullies the 5 or 6-year-old Cantona. And when the teacher will ask him to speak in class, recite a poem or something, Cantona will be gripped by this terror of having to speak. And apart from the famous seagulls quote, which we'll come to, you actually don't have much on record of Eric speaking. And even when he becomes an actor, speech is not really his strength. He's actually, as an adult player, he's sent to do speech therapy with the under-16s team at a special school. So you have this adult man with adolescents doing speech therapy where they use the tomate method, which involves listening to reassuring tapes spoken by his mother.
The young Cantona is a little bit non-verbal, but he loves playing football. How does he get on?
Well, he's brilliantly gifted, but he's trying to work out what kind of footballer he wants to be. And of course, in football, there's always this pressure to be part of the team and to be a cog and to be obedient. And that's not him at all. He doesn't think that's right. He thinks you have to express yourself, and that means you have to be fully yourself. And he says at one point, I don't like to be liked or understood. So that's his goal on the field, is to be himself, which he'll succeed in, because he's one of those players who doesn't need a shirt number. If you think of the adult Cantona, he is unlike everyone else. You just look at the field and then you see him at once.
So he's worried that his individuality has to be subsumed into the collective, because that's what football at any level, particularly at grassroots, is about. Do what the team needs. He doesn't like that. He's uncomfortable about it. And he's also uncomfortable about being an imitator. And of course, a lot of football you're learning from watching your idols. So his great hero, rightly, is Johan Cruyff. And as a 6-year-old or something, he's taken to watch the great Ajax play Marseille in 1972. So he worships Cruyff, but in the end he tears up a picture of Cruyff, because only by doing that can he be himself. He doesn't want to be a kind of wannabe Cruyff, he wants to be Cantona. And when he's asked much later, would you change anything about yourself? He says, not a thing. And he explains, it's not because I am happy with myself particularly, but I am what I am. And for him, that's the highest thing you can be, just be fully yourself.
you see already here, it's an enormous difference with other footballers because footballers typically describe themselves as professionals. And Cantona never sees himself as a professional. He's always a bit conflicted about earning a lot of money from it. He sees himself as an artist. So in football, he's doing art, just a different kind of art from what his dad did.
How does he get his foothold into club football in France?
He's 15 and he's being courted because he's a wonderful footballer. Nice bring him over and he says to them, look, I'd really like a club shirt. And they said, well, the shop is over there, go and buy one.
So he went for like a training or
he
whatever?
He went for a trial and yeah.
And they didn't give him a shirt?
No.
Tight.
I mean, it wasn't, in the 80s, shirts were quite precious. But yeah, they screw up.
It's a Nice shirt,
Yeah, how much it's going to be. Anyway, so he very obediently goes and he buys a Nice shirt, but he doesn't forget this. And then Auxerre come courting. And Auxerre is this freezing cold place in Burgundy, small town, very far from Marseille. Parents don't want him to go. But the Auxerre manager is this canny old peasant, the legendary Giroud, who will become a mate of Ferguson's. And Giroud works all this out. And so he gives Cantona a whole bag of merch.
Nice. Shin pads, socks,
everything.
Whole...
Yeah. And so age 15... Cantona goes to Auxerre and he's part of a wonderful generation with, among others, Basile Boli, who will score the goal that wins Marseille their much contested European Cup. And he turns pro, but the professional football milieu doesn't really work for him because he's always in conflict because he's all about self-expression. And everyone else in football is, no, you're just a footballer, you should obey. And he thinks if you feel something, like if you want to kick someone in the face, just do it. I mean, he does a kung fu kick on another player in his French time. There's an episode where a whole opposition team, they come and get him in his changing room after the match because they want to beat him up.
Well, all of them just...
Yeah, he beats them all up.
Like it's like a Marvel movie, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a Marvel movie. He beats them all up because the thing about Cantona, which is another aspect, so he is very hardworking. He's a very gifted footballer. He has a self-image as an artist, but he's also built like a heavyweight boxer.
This idea that wanton violence is also a form of elevated self-expression actually gets him into trouble, weirdly enough.
Yeah, so there are quite a lot of episodes and red cards. He also occasionally gets into trouble verbally. At 22, he's, already the most important player in the French team. And he goes on TV discussing the national team coach, Henri Michel, after Cantona has not been picked for a game. And Cantona says, I was reading an article by Mickey Rourke, the actor, who's a guy I really like. And Mickey Rourke said the people who award the Oscars are a bunch of shitbags. And Cantona says, I think Henri Michel, i.e. the coach of France, is not far from being included in that.
I mean, to be honest, it's probably one of the least egregious things he's actually said about anyone in public.
Well, he does get banned for a year from the French team
for saying that.
Yeah. There's a charity match to raise money for the Armenian victims of an earthquake where he gets into a bad mood fight and he takes off his shirt and storms off, which in a charity match to raise victims after a terrible earthquake is not considered a good thing. He throws a ball at a referee. There's a brilliant kung fu kick he does of a guy called Der Zakarian. But he does the kung fu kick, but he spreads his feet so that he hits the guy, because Cantona is very good at kung fu kicks, it's high-level stuff. He spreads his feet so he hits the guy on either side of his chest so he doesn't cause any damage, doesn't kill him.
Right.
Yeah, which is used as a mitigating factor.
So he's been banished by the French team for at least a year for being a bit nasty about the coach. How does his domestic life in French football go?
Well, by the age of 25, he has already played for 6 French clubs. He is also already briefly retired from football at the end of 1991 after he was suspended for throwing a ball at a referee. And he then walked up to every member of the French League's disciplinary committee, repeated the same word, idiot, or in French, idiot, and then walked out of the room. And one member of the disciplinary committee says to him, you cannot be judged like any other player because behind you there is a trail of sulphur. And so I think they banned him for 10 matches and then they said, okay, now we're going to double the ban. Got a lot of red cards. And when he decides he's going to unretire, he's sure of one thing, I'm not going to play in France again. France is a terrible country. He doesn't really like anything about France, yeah. He thinks the whole place sucks. And he gets in his head that he should go to Japan. He can't go to Japan because the clubs aren't looking, but he already has England in his head because years earlier he'd started psychoanalysis. Not, he said, because he has problems, but because he found psychoanalysis very interesting. And the psychoanalyst had advised him to move to England. Good, solid advice. And when he's banned again, the people in charge of the French national team, Michel Platini and Gérard Houllier, think, well, nobody in France wants this crazy lunatic. We're going to have to find a club for him in England. And Houllier is, as we know, was always a Liverpool fan. And so they go to Graham Souness, your mate, and they say, we've got this player, Eric Cantona. He's a bit of a nutcase, but he's a good footballer. Souness says, yeah, from what I've heard, he wouldn't be good for team spirit. So Liverpool pass up their chance. He then ends up at Sheffield Wednesday. And the Nîmes president is in fashion in Paris. It's one of his businesses. So they invite the Sheffield Wednesday club secretary over, and at a catwalk with all these half-dressed models walking by and the Sheffield Wednesday club secretary, his tongue hanging out, they negotiate that Cantona will go to Sheffield Wednesday on trial.
Ouch.
But the trial is also because to establish how crazy he is. The balance of obviously must be a decent footballer because he plays for France, but the guy has just been banned from French football again. So in 1992, in January 1992, he arrives in Sheffield and stays at the Swallow St. George's Hotel. This is from Ian Ridley's book. Sheffield in January, what's not to like? It's very cold and they can't actually train outside because everything is frozen. So they play an indoor game and he appears in the Sheffield Wednesday shirt for one match, a six-a-side friendly against the US indoor team Baltimore Blast. They lose, but I think Cantona does well and gets a couple of goals. So you know what to do. He's been in the Swallow St. George's Hotel for a week, but they can't really train outside. And he doesn't speak much English, so nobody has got to the bottom of how insane he is and violent. And Sir Trevor Francis, the Wednesday manager, who's heard about Cantona, everyone's heard about Cantona's problems by this point, says, well, maybe he can stay on for a few more days. And Cantona thinks, look, I'm a France international. You don't ask me for a trial. I'm done. Howard Wilkinson drives over from Leeds. Wilkinson is the Leeds manager. Speaks a little bit of French.
Does he?
Yeah. And Wilkinson says, and I quote, let's have a courtship. It may end in marriage or in Dear John.
God, I didn't know Wilkinson had such a way with words.
He signs for Leeds. I think at this point there's a press conference where he's introduced to the media. Asked about his inspirations, he mentions Maradona and Johan Cruyff and Pablo Picasso and Jim Morrison and Wolfgang Mozart. And he then references, I think this might be the highlight, he references the French poet Arthur Rimbaud.
Rimbaud.
He doesn't spell it out.
Indeed.
And so it's reported that the British media, it's reported that he's a big fan of Rambo.
Sylvester Stallone in the 1980s action movie franchise.
I would say he is Rimbaud and Rambo.
Indeed.
He has spoken in his life many times about Rimbaud, who's obviously a big figure in his imagination. He said that Pelé's pass to Carlos Alberto in the World Cup final 1970 and Rimbaud's poetry were both beautiful. They both give us a feeling of eternity. And, I agree with him. Football is...
You are a bit of an aesthete about football, aren't you? So
yeah,
I
I'm
see
afraid
why
so.
you guys...
Yeah, you as a Chelsea fan obviously don't have that problem. No.
Never suffered from any weird bout of aesthetism.
This is the beginning of 1992. Now, try and picture what an exotic figure this man is arriving in England at Leeds in 1992. There were almost no French people in England outside London at the time, let alone French footballers. I mean, there are almost no foreigners in the English league. French football is unheard of. And this is a particularly weird version of French footballer. He's like a young Marlon Brando. He plays with a raised shirt collar. And he comes into this very violent, very crappy English game of the time, played in the mud, long balls, everybody's one-footed, they play in rigid 4-4-2 lines. England at this point are failing to qualify for the World Cup under Graham Taylor. I mean, it's all pretty desperate. And here comes this guy with total self-confidence, great style. Later when he gets to Manchester United, the young Ryan Giggs is really impressed by how Cantona dresses.
The look is interesting. I'll be honest, even in the late 90s, I used to put my collar up at school.
Really?
Yeah, it's like just a synonymous cool thing.
You were doing Cantona?
Yeah, 10 years later.
Right.
And everyone was, and then the teachers had to go around pulling your collars back down. It became an almost universal symbol of slight, I guess, rebellion or showing that you're a little bit different. I think the look is really interesting because even though he's this incredibly exotic, thoughtful, borderline cerebral dude, he doesn't look like one. He's built like a brick shithouse. He's got dark features, dark hair, quite a menacing look. I mean, you could say thuggish. He wouldn't be out of place generally among some Leeds fans, let's be honest. It's only when he opens his mouth you realise that there's something else going on here. What do the Brits make of this strange foreigner?
he is so different that already at Leeds, although he's just really a cameo player there, he becomes a cult hero. So he only scores 3 in 15 games, I think. They're playing a long ball football, all balls to Lee Chapman's head. It doesn't really suit Cantona, so he can't quite establish a regular place in this team. But fans already start chanting "Où est Cantona," which is adapted from the then famous chant "Où est Paul McGrath." And so the "Où est Cantona" chant, weirdly, it's now such part of Manchester United culture, but it actually originates at United's hated enemies, Leeds. And on title night, so Leeds win the league in 1992 with a few appearances by Cantona, but he's really been a bit of a bit player. But the crowd are adoring him. So on the balcony of the town hall, crowd are going wild for him. And he shouts back, "Why I love you, I don't know, but I love you."
I'm sure he said that to many women in this time. Even in this sort of what becomes a cameo stint, does he display his artistic qualities for Leeds?
Yeah. I mean, he scores beautiful chipped goals. And, he goes onto the field for every game of his career thinking, I am a performer. I have a relationship with the crowd. And in England, the stadiums are packed. They're right next to the field. And so he says, in just 2 months in England, I feel more at home than I ever did in France. Now that I have mastered the perils of driving on the wrong side of the road, I can cope with everything. So he loves it. I think he loves it partly because he doesn't understand it well. So like many French people, he has this sort of simplistic view of England that French people think that other French people can't be trusted. This is a generalization, which is, however, correct. I live in Paris, people. And there is this French idea that the English believe in le fair play, and they are correct.
But that's just part of our PR machine, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, none of it's true, but he's absorbed this. And so he thinks people are good to him, people are friendly. He says one interesting thing about the English. He says, I like it that they are both warm and reserved. And so he likes it that people are nice to him, but they don't really try and get in his head. He likes the culture of English football. I think he's a bit dismayed by the quality of it. And Philippe Auclair went back for his book and watched a lot of YouTube of early 90s football. And he says, mostly it was hard-tackling, box-to-box, one-footed midfielders, giant centre-halves and centre-forwards who couldn't play football. But there's so much mud that nobody could play football anyway. And Cantona quite early says, I think English football is played so fast it cannot become art, which, for him is a big no-no.
And it's not a perfect marriage at the beginning because he finds it antediluvian way to play football, and the antediluvians don't like him and his fancy ideas.
Yeah, all these chips and getting between the lines and passing balls into space. What's he thinking of? Who does he think he is? At Leeds, he's in and out of the team because, Howard Wilkinson is an authoritarian and he does like long ball football. So everyone can see that Cantona has something, but do you actually need that thing? So at one point, Cantona is dropped again, and in process of being dropped, he shows up in a bizarre outfit with a purple jacket instead of the obligatory Leeds match day suit for a match. Relationships sour with Wilkinson. Cantona claims that he requested a transfer by fax, and he explained, the salmon that idles its way downstream will never leap the waterfall. He said he could maintain his spiritual freedom by not being a cog in some system.
Leeds, it doesn't last very long. They're winning. They don't need him because success is already coming on the pitch. So that lays the groundwork for the totemic move to Manchester United. We sort of touched on it a little bit in the Ferguson episode about how Fergie gets this seed planted into his head. But tell us the full story, Simon.
Now, Ferguson only really activates the hunt for a striker when his own big centre-forward, Dion Dublin, breaks his leg. And Ferguson is always squirreling information. We discussed that in the episode about him. And he goes to a game in Paris and he sits next to Michel Platini, who at this point I think is France manager, desperate for his star striker Cantona to find a club, because obviously it's a problem if you're managing a national team and your striker doesn't have a club because everybody refuses to sign him because he's a loony. And Platini says, you should sign Cantona. And Ferguson says, is there no baggage there? And Platini says, he's a great lad, he just needs to be wanted. And Gerard Houllier says, I know, he's a great guy, you'll be fine. Thinking, maybe we can fool Ferguson into signing this thug loony so that he can at least play in the European Championship. Ferguson absorbs all this, and then after a United Leeds match, and this is a slightly bizarre story for people who were not in English football in the early 90s, but United have played Leeds, and after the match, Ferguson goes for a bath in the changing room.
What, like a tub? A bathtub?
Are you not aware of this culture? You're so young. Until the 90s, after the game, the players would all get into a shared bath
Well, like cold plunge? No, bath.
A bath.
Why?
Be
Were there
hot
no
water
showers?
in it. No, showering was not a thing,
Okay.
really. Yeah.
Jeez.
So all the filthy players would get into the same bath and sit there and soak off, the blood, sweat and tears.
Naked?
Yeah, yeah. Now, if you wore underwear or anything, it would be seen as very bizarre. So everyone's naked.
Mm-hmm.
And Ferguson's in the bath with his centre-backs, Steve Bruce and Gary Pallister.
Wait. Ferguson's in the bath? Or he's just like...
No, he's in the bath. He's
You don't need a bath. He hasn't done anything.
He's been shouting at the referee.
Fair.
I don't know if he always had a bath, but in this case, he has a bath. And Steve Bruce and Pallister are saying, that crazy French guy who is a sub at Leeds, brilliant footballer, amazing guy. He's so good. And Ferguson thinks, right, this is interesting. My big experience centre-backs. And I think Bruce and Pallister say, and you can't really pick him up because he plays between the lines. And Ferguson, we discussed this in the episode, is a Europhile. He thinks the Europeans do it better. And so he's very intrigued by this Frenchie. And then happily, Leeds call the United chairman, Martin Edwards. Ferguson's in the room. And Leeds say, look, we want to sign Dennis Irwin. And obviously United are not going to ever sell Dennis Irwin. But Ferguson writes a note to Martin Edwards saying, ask about Cantona. Mm. And Edwards, pretending to be not very interested. Oh, that French bloke you have, what's his name? 15 minutes later, they're negotiating a price. Because Leeds think, this guy, he's trouble, he's a reserve. So they sell him to Ferguson for just £1 million, not much even in those days. They announce the fee as 1.2 million, thinking that this will assuage the massively angry Leeds fans who've lost their cult hero. Wilkinson's own son cries when he hears that Cantona has been sold. Nobody's seen anyone like Cantona. Ferguson says to his assistant, Brian Kidd, we bought Cantona for £1 million. Kidd cannot believe the price. And he says, has he lost a leg or something? £1 million. Ferguson was trying to buy David Hirst for more than £3 million. Yeah. But not everyone is impressed. The headline in the Daily Mirror is, a flashy foreigner.
I mean, it's not incorrect at this point.
Yeah, he's the flashiest of all foreigners.
Indeed.
Yes.
So at this point in his career, he's moving to his 7th club at the age of 26.
Yes.
So he's promiscuous. How does he get on initially at United when he arrives?
Well, he assumes, and I think Ferguson also assumes, that he's not going to be there very long. He says United is a temporary haven. He says, every time I join a new team, I am like a writer starting with a blank page. So yeah, he gets a kind of kick out of moving. And he's going to retire from football soon to become a writer, actor, painter, etc. And he arrives in 1992. United are going nowhere. Obviously, they're not going to win a title or anything like that. They haven't won a title since 1967 at this point. And they're in no danger of rectifying that. At the point that he joins, they're 8th, Norwich top of the league.
Darn.
United are scoring 1 goal a game. Wow. His debut is as a sub for Ryan Giggs on a rainy afternoon at Old Trafford. And there are a couple of nice moments in that game. It's against City. He hits a perfectly flighted cross. Mark Hughes heads it over the bar. And United win. And already that day, fans chant, ooh, ah, Cantona.
Right.
So they sense, we love this guy.
Already.
He's different.
Yeah.
Immediately, United's scoring rate doubles, even though he doesn't like to score tap-ins or other really obvious goals that any idiot could score.
Does he like making goals?
Yeah, he likes making goals. So he likes a pass between the lines. He likes unleashing Ryan Giggs down the wing with a diagonal pass that nobody's seen. He likes, scoring with a chip or an overhead volley or something. But he just thinks a tap-in is so banal.
So beneath him.
He scores with a chip from 20 yards against Southampton. Ferguson is sitting in the dugout next to Giggs. The young Giggs, at this point, the coming genius of British football. And Ferguson says to the young Giggs, when you reach that level of accuracy, you can call yourself a player.
Wow.
And the class of 92, the kids who have just come in, who won the Youth Cup that year, Gary Neville, Beckham, Scholes, also Giggs, Nicky Butt, they just think Cantona is God. And in fact, God becomes his nickname among the fans. And they had all these songs for him, such as, what a friend we have in Jesus, and his name is Cantona, ooh, ah, Cantona, ooh, ah, Cantona.
What does Fergie do to get it so right that Leeds couldn't do?
Well, Ferguson thinks, okay, this guy may suddenly leave one day in some disastrous episode like he always does. But while this genius is here, we're going to build the team around him. And it's not like Ferguson has this elaborate tactical plan that he's slotting Cantona into. It's just that when Cantona arrives, everything becomes clear. Cantona plays in the hole, which nobody had done in England really until that point, hardly anyone.
And is there a striker ahead of him?
Sometimes, although they start to get rid of that. Mark Hughes is there at that point, but they no longer have two up front. So, you know, the 4-4-2 in England was you had two guys up front. Cantona is typically playing behind Mark Hughes. You have Giggs herring down the wing. You have Paul Scholes coming into the team. So you're starting to move away from these very rigid lines that English football always had. So Cantona is the player that Ferguson never realised that he needed. Ferguson understood English football at this point is backward. We need to learn and become more like the Continentals. And Cantona shows him how they should play. And Mark Hughes says everyone at United begins copying Cantona's plays. Everyone starts to chip the ball and pass the ball into space and play between lines. So he just infects the place. That's the phrase that Ferguson uses.
But can't really run?
Yeah, he lacks a bit of pace. But he always finds time because he positions himself where he gets the ball. Time, he uses his body to hold people off him. And Ferguson says Cantona became a player who teach you something you didn't know about football and something that can't be learned because you had no idea it existed before they did it. I think it shows Ferguson football doesn't have to be played in these rigid lines. And we know this because even in England, you've had lots of players like that since. Zola, Dennis Bergkamp, Thierry Henry, Kevin De Bruyne, people who could make the play from between the lines. But at the time, and Peter Beardsley was a bit like that, but Cantona is really the man who shows how it can be done.
This is the most unique quality that will distinguish Eric's time at United from everywhere else, is that he's got a coach that understands how to manage this entire contradiction, this ball of mad energy.
I think Ferguson sort of worships Cantona. Ferguson at one point says, because of the way we play football in this country, we lack players of vision, players who can see out of the corners of their eyes. So he's just going to do everything to keep this very difficult man on board, and he's going to relinquish his own rules. He doesn't give Cantona the hairdryer treatment, and he lets him break dress codes. So this is what Michael Cox's book, The Mixer, says. Lee Sharp, who's a young winger at the time, he says the first time United win the title with Cantona is 93, so it's their first title in 26 years. Massive moment. And they have a reception at Town Hall, and they all turn up in smart black suits, as you're supposed to, except Lee Sharp, who arrives in an olive green silk suit.
Lee Sharp was one of those fancied himself as a potential boy band member of that team, along with Beckham.
Yeah, the football part or the boy band part didn't quite work out with Lee Sharp. So Ferguson sees Sharp come in this outfit, and Ferguson goes purple, strides across the room either to berate Sharp or to nut him. And just at that moment, Cantona strolls into the room wearing a suit, no tie, and red Nike trainers.
Oh.
Ferguson looks at Cantona and thinks, there is nothing I can do about it. He lets off a cry of frustration and stomps off, leaving Sharp alone.
But it doesn't always happen that way, because I've heard Ryan Giggs tell stories. And this is sort of, I wouldn't call it resentment, but there was a clear sense in which Eric is not treated by the same standards as the other players. And I think for someone like Giggs, who basically is treated by Ferguson from the age of 16 to probably up until he was 40 the same way, like he was his dad and he was going to tell him what to do and how to behave.
Yeah.
And Eric always gets to buck that. And so there's one incident where they're, I think, at a black tie, and Fergie holds over Giggs to say your bow tie's not on properly and you're not wearing your tux. And then Eric literally walks in a full white linen suit. And Ferguson looks over at him and goes, now that's style. And so it's so like egregiously a double standard that there's a teacher's pet and everyone else just has to suffer. But I guess you only put up with this when you know that the guy who's getting this treatment is God.
It wasn't just that Cantona was so good, it was also he worked harder than anyone had seen. And this really surprised them because, you know, in England those days you train for an hour and a half in the morning and then you go off and get drunk. Yeah. Cantona shows up before everyone else for training. He does his own warm-up and then consents to join in the team warm-up. The youth coach at United, Eric Harrison, said the first time he saw Cantona train, he wanted to kidnap him and spend a week talking to him about football. He then stays on after training. So Ferguson says the first day, training is over, Cantona goes up to Ferguson and says, can I have a goalkeeper, 2 youth players and some footballs? And Ferguson's like, what do you need this for? Training is over. I've never seen anyone stay. And Cantona said, no, I need to practice. So Ferguson gives him all that. The other players find out that the coolest guy on the team, God, the man who has all the privileges, trains twice as long every day as they do. So people start to stay on after training and it becomes the norm. And I think Phil Neville says, look, the class of 92, we were all workers, but that was laughed at by the older players. You were teachers' pets and so on. And he says when the coolest man in the squad does 2 hours extra training. Yeah. So the youngsters all hang out with him and do extra training. And they watch Cantona obsessively, even in the changing room. Like, how does he prepare? Does he put his left sock on first? What is he rubbing into his body? You know, he's seen as this exemplar from a higher footballing culture, which is correct.
So Cantona, with his obviously deep sense of kind of individualism, and I would say even lonerism, is he kind of bringing the younger kids to say, I will teach you as kind of avuncular figure, or is it just happening through example?
Well, he does do some teaching. I mean, at one point he says to Beckham and Gary Neville, I think, we will win the Champions League together, which sadly it never quite happens, but it does for them. Mm. And I think they'd never thought they could win the Champions League. But there's at one point they played a big Champions League game against Galatasaray. Ferguson comes into the changing room and Cantona is at the tactics board outlining moves while Beckham and Gary Neville are watching open mouthed like, wow, you know, never thought of all that. So yeah, he transforms the culture of United. I mean, in the Ferguson episode, we talked about how it went from a club of alcoholics to a club of workaholics, and Cantona is instrumental in that process. And everyone in English football is looking at this and thinking, wow, I didn't know you could play like that. I mean, this is 1993. This is the year that Graham Taylor's England lose to Norway playing backward long ball football. And meanwhile, you have this guy. And so every club in England is thinking, oh, we want a Cantona. And they start to sign kind of little playmakers from Europe, many of whom don't pan out. He's in exile as well because France just keeps going badly for him. After being kicked out by all these French clubs, they then fail to qualify for the World Cup 94.
Oh my God.
So everything in France is going really badly. Everything in England is going brilliantly. United have won the title in 93. In 94, they win the double. Cantona is the most admired player. Ferguson's pacification strategy has paid off. Ferguson understood the way to manage this quite simple person was always to take his side. Doesn't matter how wrong he is. Just say, you're right, Eric, and I'm going to protect you against all those bad people. Because Cantona had this very black and white view of the world. I am good, and everyone else bad, boring, banal, bureaucratic. They should be kicked in the face. And Ferguson said, yeah, you're right.
And it's all going fantastically. United will come to dominate English football, and the centre of this play is going to be Eric Cantona. Until a moment in January 1995, which changes, I think, the course of English football.
Yes.
Definitely the course of Eric Cantona's professional career, and will be the biggest test of Ferguson's management skills. It's also a moment when you, Simon Cooper, are a young cub journalist at the Financial Times and get asked to write your first front-page story about that kick.
Find out how it all unfolds after the break. This is a reminder that you're listening to Heroes and Humans of Football with me, Simon Cooper.
And me, Mehreen Khan. Welcome back to Heroes and Humans of Football, where you join us on the 25th of January 1995 on a wet, dark Wednesday in South London at Selhurst Park, where one of the most totemic moments in football, in English football at the very least, is about to take place. Simon Cooper, what were you doing on Wednesday, January 25th, 1995?
I was definitely not watching this match. I don't think anybody was. But there had been this scene of horror from what the early reports are putting out at Selhurst. Cantona has been sent off, which in his career is fairly standard. He had kicked the Crystal Palace defender Richard Shaw. As Cantona is walking off, a Crystal Palace supporter called Matthew Simmons runs down and starts shouting abuse at Cantona. According to witnesses in court, Simmons shouts, "You fucking cheating French cunt. Fuck off back to France, you motherfucker. French bastard. Wanker."
I mean, this is pretty standard fare at any game, anywhere in the UK at this point.
We should add that he also questioned the sexual integrity of Cantona's mother, according to witnesses.
Again, nothing out of the ordinary.
Simmons would later say in court that he did not say that. What he said was, "Off you go, Mr. Cantona. Have an early bath."
It's probably just lost in translation somewhere, I feel like the both of them mean the same thing. Bye-bye.
So Simmons has said bye-bye. Simmons is a window fitter from Thornton Heath who has far-right connections with the National Front and other such groups. Cantona does not let it go. Instead, he leaps into the stands 2-footed and karate kick Simmons or kung fu kick Simmons. If listeners are aware of what exactly his kick was, they should...
write in Simon to let him know.
Now, Cantona said years later that he felt good about kicking Simmons, should have kicked him harder, and that he liked that United fans still remember this as one of the best moments in the club history, but he also said he shouldn't have done it. But it becomes a scandalous event that continues to live in history, by the way. Simmons now has an account on X with 44 followers. His entire bio on his X account is, quote, "Got a smack off Cantona 25 years ago. Now I'm back with my own story."
You got to rate it. He's milking it for what it's worth. So you're not watching this game.
No, why would I?
As the only person then at the Financial Times who probably pays any attention to football, you have to write about it.
Yeah, so I come into the office the next day. It's my first month at the newspaper. It's my first month in professional employment.
You are a graduate trainee.
I am the lowest paid journalist in the building, and I am also the lowest ranked journalist in the building. I get zero respect, less than zero. I am therefore amazed when the news editor, Julia Cuthbertson, beckons me over.
You must thought you were in trouble.
And she said, "I love this story. It is everything that is horrendous about football. This horrendous man, this horrendous supporter, this horrendous stadium, everything about this sport is horrendous. It's a front page story. You are going to write it. Do not screw up."
Oh.
So I am terrified, right? I've only written briefs for the, page 27 up to that point. So I have to write this. I mean, remember, this is a time when British football is in extremely bad odour. There's just been scandal after scandal. So it's in that climate that Cantona's kick is judged to be front page material for the Financial Times. The newspaper in those days doesn't really cover sport. I just have to quote all the people who are saying this is the worst thing that has ever been done in the world and he should be strung up and definitely banned from football forever, which is the immediate assumption that this is the end. So I do write the piece. I will dig it out. It did appear on the front page.
Byline?
Byline.
Come on.
Yes, some people are very condemnatory. So Brian Clough says, "I'd cut his balls off." The Sun wants him expelled from football. The Sun runs, I think, 12 pages on the kick. And they sign up Matthew Simmons as a Sun commentator. Cantona's wife, Isabel, told him he had been an idiot. The French Football Federation immediately stripped him of the captaincy. Ferguson lies awake all night. He gets up at 5 a.m. to watch a video, and he tells L'Équipe in France, quote, "Jesus Christ, it was terrible. I couldn't believe it. How could Eric have done it? At the club, he is usually so calm." Now, this is exactly what you always hear from neighbours of terrorists and serial killers and so on when they're interviewed. They say,
quiet, didn't really have any friends, but he always smiled at me in the morning when I was taking out the milk.
"I thought he was a nice boy." Yeah. His mother, though, she has leapt to his defence. And she tells L'Équipe to insult someone's mother is a very bad thing in France. We are Marseille, we have dignity, and if somebody insults the mother in Marseille, you kick them in the face,
Indeed, I think there are two seminal moments of footballing violence that stick out in my head. One is Cantona and the kick, and the other one, of course, is Zidane, Materazzi, the headbutt. And so the things that stand out to me, and I've watched both of them back in slow motion, is that the Zidane moment stands out because you see there's a moment where something just flips in his head. Mm-hmm. Where Materazzi said something like, "Mother, your sister, your daughter, whatever." And it's almost like you can see the throbbing vein and he just goes in.
And such like the kick, so elegant and so well placed.
It is, but there's obviously a moment where something has snapped inside this man. And when I watch the Cantona thing back, what I'm struck by is that there's no snapping moment.
Yeah, and if you'd said to him a minute before, if you kick this nitwit in the face, you could be banned from football for life, he would probably have said, yeah, fine. And actually, football fans, a lot of them, think this is just brilliant.
Of course they do.
Readers of 442 that season will name the kick their best moment of the season. There is a radio show 606, which even you may have...
It's a phone-in show on 5 Live.
Still exists?
I think it does, yes.
Amazing. The hosts say that Cantona should get an immediate pay rise. Danny Baker says, "I really think the authorities and the media have been out of touch on this one. Most football fans just thought the whole thing was incredibly funny." I mean, it was a great moment. United fans love it. They spend most of the next match, which they beat Wrexham 5-2, chanting "Ooh, our Cantona," writes Ian Ridley. Michael Cox's analysis is quite interesting. He says, look, it was disgraceful, but it was also very good for the Premier League because it's on news all over the world. So take my news editor or FT readers. These are people, many of them never followed football at all. And it penetrated their consciousness. They thought, wow, yeah, Premier League, this really interesting character, really complicated figure it introduced Cantona to a much bigger audience.
My favourite proxy for understanding how seminal something is with the fullness of time is to look at how much the shirts are going for.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an away game. So United are wearing their second black strip with the sort of yellow or goldish trim. And that is one of the most sought after, hardest to get United shirts. It goes in the hundreds and hundreds of pounds if you can get it from that season, because it's associated with that moment.
And the kick is such a beautiful picture that it became used as an anti-fascist poster about sort of kicking out fascism. You see the kick. I mean, 30 years on, and I thought, yeah, immediately recognise that moment. Matthew Simmons describes his ordeal in The Sun. I quote, "Cantona's boot stud slammed into my heart. I reeled back, unable to believe what was happening. I was being attacked by one of the biggest soccer stars in the world."
Do we think those are his words?
The joke at the time was the shit has hit the fan. This leaves United with an issue. Like, are we going to let our best player be sold to Inter Milan, who wanted to buy him? Just get him out. Are we going to watch as he's banned from football for life? What happens with Cantona? Can he be sustained? That's the question. And Ferguson at first thinks, he can't stay. We're going to have to get rid of him.
And Ferguson is, at this point, we mentioned it a little bit in our episode, but he's taking counsel from everywhere. I think the chairman of Marks and Spencer's lobbies him to keep Eric, says you can't get rid of Eric. He's having people on the other side saying you have to get rid of him. This is the only way you can show your leadership. So he's in a true quandary about what to do. And Eric at this point he's not very contrite about it either.
No, but Ferguson also sympathises in a way, because we discussed in our Ferguson episode that Ferguson himself had been a very violent player. And so although Cantona was a much better footballer than Ferguson had been a violent centre-forward. Cantona's a violent centre-forward. He kind of likes that. And Ferguson says there's nothing wrong with losing your temper if it's for the right reasons, which I think is his ultimate mantra. At one point, a magistrate gives Cantona a 2-week prison sentence, saying that he should be an example to children, and he's not, which is absurd because you can't be sentenced for not being a role model. And so on appeal, he wins, and he has to do community service instead. But it turns out his brand has been massively built. So while everyone understands he's going to be banned for a long time, United give him a ban. In the end, it becomes an 8 or 9 month ban from football. During this ban, he negotiates a much bigger contract with United, and Nike make him their new bad boy poster boy. Nike love it. Maybe you can read the text of the Nike ad.
"I have been punished for striking a goalkeeper, for spitting at supporters, for throwing my shirt at a referee, for calling my manager a bag of shit. I call those who judge me a bunch of idiots. I thought I might have trouble finding a sponsor." Well, clearly not. So it's actually, weirdly enough, does become celebrated.
The moment helps build the United brand as well. It turns United into a kind of bigger institution than it had been at that point. And a United executive once told me that the club came to see its brand as being built on 3 pop stars: George Best, David Beckham, and Eric Cantona. So he becomes a real central pillar of this brand.
Whereas Beckham is the squeaky clean, perfect member of the boy band. You always need the dark, mysterious, bad boy one, and that's Eric.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah, he's kind of the John Lennon to Beckham's Paul McCartney.
Indeed.
So Cantona's prison sentence is commuted to community service. After this is announced, he has to face a room full of journalists. And the journalists think, well, he has committed the most dastardly act in British life since Hitler bombed London. So obviously he's going to issue a contrite apology. Cantona doesn't apologise, never in his life. And he doesn't really want to speak to the media because, Cantona doesn't talk. And United's solicitor, I think it's Maurice Watkins, says, look, you have to say something. You have to go in there and just say something. It doesn't matter what. And so this is where Cantona famously says... He
took that very literally. Say something, it doesn't matter what.
Here you can hear his exact words.
When the seagulls follow the trawler, it's because they think sardines will be thrown into the sea. Thank you very much.
It's not just us laughing, all the journalists present laughing.
No, I'll be honest, you got the worst lawyer in the world, says just say something.
It's brilliant. It's performance poetry, and it's the ultimate Cantona moment. He's confronting the world as an artist, as a creator. This is what Rimbaud would have done. If Arthur Rimbaud had been banned for kicking a fan in the face at Selhurst Park, Rimbaud would have given exactly that press conference. And so he's totally himself at that moment, but he's also deliciously fulfilling English stereotypes about French suits. And he's gratifying United fans in Ferguson because they love this lack of contrition.
Yeah.
I mean, that becomes part of sort of who United are. We kick you in the face and we don't care. That's Ferguson's United.
Yeah, it's very much everyone hates us. We don't care. We do what we want. And being hated is also very much part of the brand. It becomes a proxy for their success that everyone hates them.
Yeah, so Cantona has this kind of United worldview of it's us against an evil world, the good people against an evil world, and you don't care what the evil world thinks anyway. Now, Matthew Simmons is also in trouble. He's fined £500 in court for threatening behaviour towards Cantona. He's banned from all football grounds. And when this sentence is announced, Matthew Simmons, very much in the spirit of the whole thing, tries to assault the prosecutor.
I thought you were going to say he read out a Rambo poem.
He should have done, because after assaulting the prosecutor, Simmons is sentenced to a week in prison for contempt. But in the end, he only has to spend one night inside and is then let go, because I guess in those days also they didn't have enough prisons.
He knew that I've got 5 minutes of fame. I need to string this out for as long as possible.
Yeah, so John Barnes, who had taken a huge amount of racist abuse in his career, he later said Cantona may have done English football a favour by drawing attention to how some fans behave towards players. It was a big problem.
And if we just take what Matthew Simmons said verbally and write it down and put it on a post on social media, this is happening millions and millions of times a day to footballers around the world. And it's far worse. So Eric is living it up. He's made a bit of money out of this. Nike have given him a massive new sponsorship deal. United have given him a new contract. But how the hell is he going to spend 9 months of his life without football?
Well, first he goes on holiday to Guadeloupe with his wife and his small boy. And of course, a British TV journalist is sent out to pursue them. When the journalist approaches him on the beach and says, here I am to interview you about the karate kick, Cantona answers him in the only way possible. He takes a run up. He karate kicks the journalist on the beach, fracturing his ribs.
Oh, that was a big one. Okay.
I think this is John Rambo rather than Arthur Rimbaud. Now, it's good to do this when you're a celebrity staying at a hotel in France, because Guadeloupe is part of France, and the person you're doing it to is not a French person. So the hotel protected him. The journalist is sent packing.
Is it called poetic justice?
There is no court action. And also the journalist has broken French privacy laws, which quite rightly don't allow you to go up to people and ask them about karate kicks if they are having a private moment with their spouse.
Got it.
But that seems to have been the last truly violent episode of Cantona's playing career anyway. Cantona has learned, I want to play football and I can't just go around kicking people. He's also reached the age where violent men typically start becoming less violent. So this is 1995. He's about to turn 29. He's kind of growing out of his violent years. He does community service. He trains hundreds of kids. He really enjoys it. Gets a lot of value from training these kids for his community service. He learns to play the trumpet very badly.
Or in his words, very, very well. Because he would then go on a trumpet tour.
He would say, I do it in my own way. I'm not saying it is good, it is not bad, but it is who I am. He tells one boy, if you get a yellow card, just walk away, do not assault the referee.
Don't throw balls at the referee.
It's a kind of growth. Ferguson also says to him, look, mate, this was really your last chance.
We did you a solid, you're staying, but...
Yeah, but, if you do this again, I think your future employment prospects in this industry will diminish. Cantona comes back and he's brilliant. It's 95-96 season, which is famously prefaced by Alan Hansen saying on Match of the Day,
you'll never win anything with kids.
So the kids of United, led by Cantona, do the double. Cantona as captain, of course, scores the only goal of the FA Cup final 1996 against Liverpool. Well, actually, this time it's Liverpool who come out in all white Cantona suits.
Amazing. Yeah. I think Ferguson looks to his assistant kid, and when he sees them coming out in white suits, he was like, we've got this.
Yeah. As Cantona climbs the 39 steps to pick up the trophy, Liverpool fans spit at him. Now, I would definitely have dived headfirst in with a karate kick at this point. Cantona just looks at them disdainfully.
Oh. So he's actually, ironically, showing way more willpower than he's ever done in his life by not retaliating.
Yeah, I think he suddenly has come to feel that, maybe some kind of self-control is... Life isn't only about self-expression, there must be moments of self-control as well. Yeah. Which is a realisation that comes to most of us.
Cantona has made his return to United. It's been seamless. He's back. Yeah, he's getting way more stick than usual. But what about the other part of his footballing life? How is it going with Les Bleus?
Well, he was the key player in the French team in the early 90s. But while he's banned, a new French team is taking shape. And it's a team that we now know would go on to win the World Cup in 98. And it's a team with a different creator from Marseille at its heart, Zinedine Zidane. So Zidane makes his debut in 94 when Cantona is captain still. And at Zidane's debut, he comes on as a sub, France losing against the Czech Republic. Zidane, the sub, scores 2 goals and France draw 2-2. So you think, wow, this kid has some promise. And Zidane, like Cantona, does not express himself in words. So interviewed after the match, Zidane, sweating on TV, can only say, "I have no words, c'est fabuleux." In the changing room, Cantona, as captain, goes up to his fellow Marseillais and he gives Zidane the Czech match pennant as a souvenir. This is from Tom Williams' very good book about French football, Va Va Voom. And you think, wow, these 2 guys from Marseille, brilliant creators, still young, early career, they could be some combo in the French team. You know, this team that has missed 2 World Cups running, maybe France going somewhere. But after this Czech game, Cantona and Zidane would only play together for France for another 19 minutes on the field together.
So how does history conspire to work against them?
Well, a new midfield is taking shape, with Zidane backed by Yuri Djurkaev, who's a very good creator, and the non-creative Didier Deschamps, who's a kind of scuffling defensive midfielder who's now the French coach. And there's no place for another playmaker. Cantona seems to have developed a particular animus against Deschamps, because Deschamps is exactly the kind of thing he hates. He's a disciplined footballer. He's a footballer of systems. Deschamps, in Cantona's word, is a water carrier. But Deschamps was like, yeah, I'm a water carrier. You need water carriers. He was quite proud of it. So there's no place for Cantona in this French midfield or as a number 10, but they need a centre forward. They don't have a good centre forward. So Aimé Jacquet, who's the French coach, who will win the World Cup, comes to Manchester in January 96. So Cantona is just eating up the Premier League, he's the best player in the league. And Jacquet says to Cantona, look, I can't have you as a 10, but we need you as a centre forward. And Cantona refuses.
Wow.
He thinks, I'm not going to be a subordinate. I'm not going to play in a team where Zidane and Djurkaev are the main figures. That's not me. I'm the main character.
Is there something else going on, this kind of animus he has towards France?
Yeah, he doesn't like France by this point.
So he's not willing to sacrifice himself.
Well, France has not been a successful team in his time. This will dramatically change after his time. And yes, he has an animus against the country at this point. And he feels he loves England. He's an Anglophile. And then in 1997, very suddenly, he hasn't even yet turned 31, he suddenly retires. Big shock. And when you look at the pictures, yeah, he got a bit fatter, it was even double-chinned, but still he was at the top of the game, and nobody walks out of football at the top of the game. I mean, can you think of any other example of anyone doing that? No. And he'd always said, I'm going to leave football before I decline, kind of live fast, die young, have a beautiful corpse. That was his motto. And he'd said, when I past my peak, I'll quit because it would be dishonest to continue. He says something like, when I can no longer improve, I will quit. And nobody does that. But he does. He climbs to the top of the mountain, but before he can start going down the mountain, he's done.
So this very, very surprising exit stage left means that the 2 most significant things that are going to happen in football for teams associated with Cantona, which is the 98 World Cup, which France win, and then the 99 Champions League triumph that United have, Cantona's not there. He's missing.
Yeah, I wonder in 98 at the World Cup whether he's even watching on TV as Zidane and Deschamps, his enemy Deschamps, win the World Cup. And do you remember the France centre-forward in 1998?
Oh my God, it was someone awful.
He later ends up at Newcastle briefly where he fails. Stéphane
Guivache, that's it.
He was a third-rate centre-forward. In the final, Zidane had a brilliant match, obviously, but even beyond scoring. So Zidane keeps making space, trying to get the ball to Guivache, and Guivache just isn't good enough to get away from Brazil defenders. So France are like playing without a centre-forward. And you think that could have been Cantona.
Yeah.
Brilliant footballer, just if he had just been willing to say, okay, I'll be a centre-forward in this team. My fellow Marseillais, Zidane, will give me ball after ball, and I'll just, score 3 a game.
And in 99, United fulfill Eric's prophecy. He tells Beckham, Scholes and Neville that they will win the Champions League, but he's not there to do it with them. Do we think actually the course of the game may have been different if he played? Because, of course, Sheringham and Solskjaer are the two guys that come off the bench to score.
Yeah, and Lothar Matthäus was the Bayern libero, an extremely canny player, would have known how to shut down Cantona. Ferguson would not necessarily have substituted Cantona if they needed a goal, because Ferguson was very in awe of Cantona. History would have been different, and of course United couldn't do better than that treble-winning season. It's the only time an English club who ever won the treble. So yes, Cantona could have put that achievement at risk.
Cantona's unexpectedly retired, but we know that when he was a player, he was incredibly diligent. He spent hours and hours on the training pitch. This is why Ferguson loved him. So now football is no longer in his life. What does he fill it with, if anything?
Well, he struggles a bit with the loss of the imposed discipline that football gives you. So suddenly he can go out drinking, he can stay out late, and he does. And he says he kind of misses the control that football gave him. But Cantona doesn't see himself as a footballer. Cantona sees himself as an artist. And there are many art forms. You don't have to be great at them to do them. His father was an amateur painter, but loved painting. And so now he's not a footballer anymore, but he will just explore other art forms. And the main one that he goes into initially is acting, which may seem odd for somebody who speaks haltingly and has a little bit of a trauma about public speaking. His first lead role is as a small-time boxer, I think quite well cast, in a film called Mookie, in which his co-star is a chimpanzee.
Sorry.
And Le Journal du Dimanche in France suggests that the chimpanzee is a more expressive actor
Ouch.
than Eric. The film does not do very well. It is not released in Britain. But he does appear in a much bigger film. He's the French ambassador, Monsieur de Foix, in the film Elizabeth, where he plays alongside Kate Blanchett,
Yeah.
Jeffrey Rush, and Richard Attenborough.
I've seen this film about Elizabeth I, of course. Yeah, I mean, now I just realised that he's actually in that film.
And probably his biggest role is in Ken Loach's very good film, Looking for Eric, 2009. You've not seen it?
I've not seen it, actually.
It's good. Not necessarily because of Cantona, but it's about Cantona. He's played by himself. And initially you see him as a poster on the wall. And the postman is having trouble. He's being bullied. There's bad guys, rich people. And Cantona steps out of the poster and becomes himself and helps the postman beat up the villains. Very Cantona thing. And there are lines in the film like, I am not a man, I am Cantona. And so he plays himself, which of course makes it easier.
I mean, this is borderline pastiche, though. Oh, I mean, it's just full-blown pastiche at this point.
I mean, Ken Loach says, look, Cantona really co-created this film and he added ideas. And Cantona uses the film to present himself. He's an artist who's expressing himself. And he sees Ken Loach as a kind of Alex Ferguson figure. He says, look, these guys are both geniuses. He tells the Financial Times, director, manager, football, film, it's just a different game, but still play. He really admires Loach in the same way that he admires Ferguson. And now he's fallen in with Ken Loach, who's a far-left filmmaker. And Cantona sort of ventures into politics as well at this point. In fact, he ventures very much onto your terrain, you as the economics editor of the Times.
So he has various forays. So there's a couple of notable ones. My favourite is at the height of the sovereign debt crisis in 2010, so in the aftermath of the banking meltdown. He urges everyone in the world to go to the banks, go to the ATM and withdraw all the money to accelerate the collapse of the world financial system.
Smart.
And he actually does this at his local BNP Paribas branch in a town called Albert, where he goes and he says to the bank, I want all my money, because if you drain deposits out of the banking system, you will actually collapse the banking system. It's not a huge success, so I don't know how many people actually join him into this, but he's leaning into, this wave of protest movements. This is when Occupy Wall Street is going on.
Yep.
Obviously very anti-establishment, clearly has an anti-capitalist bent. Any kind of causes around this area, you're going to find Cantona in and around them. Today, this is about, he's a very vocal supporter of Palestinian rights. I think that's something that's given him an entirely new profile in different parts of the world.
I hadn't actually realised that.
Yeah, he's been incredibly vocal about the conflict in the Middle East, not just in the last year, but he's been doing it for a very, very long time. He's a massive detractor of Western wars in foreign countries, I guess neoconservatism. He places himself generally on a obviously progressive part of the political spectrum. And I think we've spoken about this in other episodes. So many people, ex-footballers, current footballers, are just scared to come out. Eric has absolutely no qualms about telling the world about what he feels about the most serious issues in the world right now.
Yep. He's always seeking expression still, whether that's about politics or by engaging in ever new art forms. He's also painted, he's exhibited photographs. I mean, he made some quite ambitious collages, a mix of photo and paint. He's produced plays, he's read poems. His wife is an actress and a producer. And so football was his form of art, his dominant form of art for a few years. But he's very happy to move on.
And for all of his sort of highfalutin ideas as an aesthete and about the freedom of expression afforded to artists, he also does something which I find quite jarring with all these values, is that he is massively monetized and commercialized his own face, his brand, his words, because even in 2024, you often can't move on the internet without seeing Eric Cantona as the face of some betting company, some sports brand, some random online booking platform. He's there. And for the brands, I completely understand it, because if there is a joke, they want to be part of it. But does it not undermine some of his credentials about, as you said, money is banal and capitalism is corrupt? I mean, they're not bad ads, of course. They always kind of stick in the craw. It's the same it's the same shtick, right? It's Eric saying something completely nonsensical, wearing a flat cap with that massive beard of his in a deep, gravelly voice. And that's kind of it. I mean, it doesn't take a huge amount of creativity. Even for his, sense of expansive artistic expression, it's quite rudimentary as an art form.
There are more ambitious things he does to make money. So I received, like you see ads for him all the time, I received an email the other day. They wanted me to write an article saying, Looking FC of Eric Cantona is organising trips to big European cities around derby matches. And so if you pay for this as a supporter, they get you a match seat. And then you also do things that include creating urban art with Cantona in Naples. I don't know, maybe you go around with Cantona painting graffiti around Naples, or you can sing karaoke with Javier Zanetti in Milan. You can celebrate the New Year with Claudia Caniggia in Glasgow. People look this up online if you want to do this.
This cannot be real.
You can cook with Emmanuel Petit in London, or you can play a paddle tournament with Marco Materazzi in Milan. This is an email I got. So Cantona has set all this up, and the public relations person wrote to me, are the latest incarnation of the travel brand Looking FC of Cantona.
This is a scam.
Whose ambition and popularity have not stopped growing since 2022.
I mean, is he just coming up with harebrained money-making ideas now with some of his mates?
I think he also, it is money-making, but I think he also he would like to create urban art with you in Naples.
It's the paddle with Materazzi that's really the one that got me in the Ghoulies.
That's the one you would go for?
I want to do that, yeah.
But you are, despite being economics editor of the Times, you are unimpressed by his commercial anti-commercialism.
I mean, there are ways to do it. I think he does it in such a brazen way that, again, I'm thinking, is this all a very subversive, elaborate joke? And if it is, I'm all about it. But if he's just getting the bag because he knows he's become a brand in and of himself, then yeah, I'm a bit cynical about that. You can't be telling people to go out and rush and take all their money out of the banking systems when you know that you're going to get a massive deal to sponsor booking.com or something, It's kind of, I don't know. Now, so there's one reading of this is just a subversive artistic act like everything else that he does. Or is it more of a cynical, I don't know, betrayal of what he professed to be his values? As you said, he thinks money is banal and he doesn't want fame or attention. But, I mean, the man is just peppering the world with his face and being exploited by corporate, or being handsomely remunerated.
Well, being a rebel and being anti-commercial are stances that can be commercially very lucrative.
Yes, and so I guess the brands like him because, I think there's a massive generation of kids who understand that Eric Cantona was a footballer, but now only see him as this kind of memed figure on the internet. And he is really leaning into it, and I think he probably enjoys it.
So Guy Debord, who was the situationist philosopher, very influential in 1968, he was all about creating, I'm probably getting this wrong, these happenings, these statements, these artistic statements about the modern world and commercialism that you show it up to ridicule it. You can read Cantona's career as a succession of situationist statements, so karate kicking a fan in the face, playing the trumpet.
It's true. The body seagulls. Of work is impressive.
Yeah.
And if it goes all the way up to doing adverts for booking.com or whatever, then it is quite subversive as a whole.
Yeah, so the booking.com ad we can reread as a subversive statement about capitalism.
Indeed,
yeah,
yes,
maybe,
yes.
Maybe.
Also a very lucrative one. There we go. We're at that stage where we're going to be looking back and asking about the legacy of Eric Cantona. Let's start with football. How will football come to judge the impact of Eric Cantona?
Alex Ferguson would place him very high. Ferguson said he had 4 world-class players in his 27 years at United, and they were Giggs, Cristiano Ronaldo, Scholes, and Eric Cantona. And once in the 90s, this is obviously before Cristiano Ronaldo, who I think everyone would accept as a better player than Cantona, but before Ronaldo, Ferguson calls Cantona the best player I have ever had.
Wow.
Yes, I think that would have been true in the 90s, but he wasn't the best player the Premier League has ever had.
Yeah.
We said he's a bit slow. He didn't succeed in international competitions for club or country. He wouldn't have the same impact now. I mean, if you could pick between Thierry Henry, Cristiano Ronaldo and Cantona, you would, I think, not put Cantona on their level as a player.
But I guess his specialness is that he is the first. And do we think that we wouldn't have had Bergkamp, Henry, Zola if there wasn't first a Cantona?
Well, I mean, if it had been Bergkamp or Zola first, everyone would have tried to sign a Bergkamp or a Zola because they would have made that kind of impact, revolutionised English football, shown that it's a game about diagonals and about creating space by putting yourself in new positions, that football is not just a kind of reenactment of World War I without machine guns, which I think was the British norm pre-Cantona. So Cantona was first. Cantona was also a much more interesting figure than Zola or Bergkamp. So we still remember him, with not just us still talking about him 30 years on.
But I'm struck that if somebody says, who are the top 5 Premier League players of all time, he often doesn't make it into the top 5.
No. I mean, football also gets better every year. I mean, Kevin De Bruyne against Cantona.
Yeah, it's no competition.
But there was a poll in 2008 by the Premier League's then sponsor Barclays. Who is the Premier League's all-time favourite player? And of course it was
Eric Cantona.
Yeah.
But that's very much for everything else, the whole Cantona package. And in that sense, the cult nature of what he was is very difficult and almost impossible to replicate. And as much as I love Kevin De Bruyne, he doesn't have that about him.
Well, he's also, to survive in football now and to reach the top and to excel every week at the top and to get better every week, you need to live like Kevin De Bruyne. You can't live like Cantona. You can't behave like Cantona. You have to accept discipline from the age of 12. And so I just don't think he would have probably even had a career. I mean, it's lucky, it's fluky, it's partly thanks to Ferguson's intercession that his career continued after 95 and that he stayed at the top for another 2.5 years.
I mean, without Ferguson, he would have just been some dude who goes around Holland singing badly with the trumpet.
Yeah.
Which is quite something.
Well, he still does that. But
he's got a few years of football to justify the ticket prices.
So, yes, there have been better players in England, but I don't know if there was anyone who meant as much in English football.
He's a star because of the pioneering quality of what he did. But we're also saying that if he wasn't the first, somebody else would have been the first.
Yeah, and English football would have opened up to the great players of the world and would have become a sophisticated league. It's just that Cantona, like Wenger in his way, these were pioneers from France who transformed English football and will always be remembered for that. And then Cantona is also a commentary on how boring most footballers are. So we embrace him because he's not the guy who says, yeah, well, it was a good win and hopefully we'll do it again next Saturday. He's never done that. I
just don't think we're ever going to get a subversive footballer who sees his job not to play football, not to be a professional, but to use football as a true form of artistic expression, and then to devote the rest of his life trying to do that art and leaving football behind. I can't see it ever happening in the 2020s or the 2030s unless somebody really is playing an elaborate joke on us.
Yeah, I mean, there's something very beautiful, not just about Cantona the footballer, that was beautiful, but just about how he chooses to live his life. I mean, if you forgive him for the Betfair ads. Given that, he has basically tried his hand at everything. If he didn't have football at all, what do we think he'd be doing? I think he would have ended up like his dad in working class Bohemia. So he would have been a very minor all-round artist, kind of maybe sometimes having a show at the local town hall. He'd be living in some village in France in a cave, and he would go to the local town hall and you'd walk around and there would be blobs of paint and photographs stuck on them, and they would say, oh yes, this is an exhibition by our local artist, Monsieur Cantona. Monsieur Cantona would be standing in a corner of the town hall lobby glaring at you and maybe headbutting you if you didn't show the correct appreciation. Then he'd go back to his cave, he'd live on social security.
I think he'd be like Banksy. I think he'd be completely unknown and have use a nom de guerre and nobody would know, and he'd just produce work. And
Yeah, but Banksy is a great artist.
Yeah, I know, but I feel like Banksy without any of the acclamation that he gets. I'm going to stick to my other thing of that somehow he'd find his way to the US and he'd become a WWE wrestling star with the mankini on and just entertain people with that big bruising body of his.
Yeah.
Would we like to hang out with him? Have you actually met him, Simon?
No. I mean, let's make this more specific.
Okay.
We usually ask, would we like to hang out with him? Will you sign up for the 4-day trip to Naples where you could create urban art with Cantona in Naples?
I love Naples, one of my favourite cities.
Well, I mean, this is match made in heaven,
For
right?
this reason, yes. And we can go and maybe we could graffiti over all of the Maradona portraits and do ones of me and Eric instead. You haven't met the great man.
No. So, yeah, I'd like to hang out with him. He's 58 now, so I think the risk of a karate kick is probably lower than before.
You should wear a bulletproof vest and maybe a helmet just in case.
I do that anyway, cycling in Paris. Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. Next week's episode is on Manchester United's new millennial coach, Rimbaud and Rambo, a man in a hurry to get to the top of football's managerial pyramid. Be sure to check it out. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
And Simon Cooper.
and this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.